Where are your parents?
They're dead on the ground. Come here quickly because I'm afraid. Please hurry.
Okay, they're coming, okay?
What happened today?
I ran very fast with my baby sister. I just didn't want to be killed.
Okay.
I've been told you're a spitting image of your dad. You look just like him. You act just like him. Naomi, she looks just like my mom. I'm very thankful for what I have. And in a sense, it's like I am living through my parents' life. My parents will always live on within me.
9:17 in the morning. On September 20th, 2013, a 911 dispatcher in Danville, Kentucky picks up the phone.
911, where's your emergency?
On the other end of the line, silence. Then a small voice, barely above a whisper.
Someone is a robber at a pawn shop.
Someone's robbing the pawn shop?
And my parents got shot.
Where is the robber?
He's right here right now.
Where are your parents?
They're dead on the ground. Come here quickly because I'm afraid.
The dispatcher asks him to stay quiet, not to make a sound, because somewhere inside that locked building, the killer might still be there. What that 9-year-old boy had already done, in the minutes before that phone call, would eventually bring a murderer to justice. This is the story of Andrew Hawkins-Smith and the pastor who thought God would protect him from the truth. To understand what happened inside that pawn shop on a Friday morning in September, you first have to understand the kind of people who ran it. Michael Hawkins-Smith was 35 years old. His wife, Angie, was 38. By everyone who knew them, they were described the same way every single time.
Angie was a real nice young lady, and she was really his first love. They was just so happy together.
Mike and Angie met young. They built a life in central Kentucky, grounded in two things, family and faith. Mike worked as a part-time youth pastor. Both of them were pillars of their church community, known everywhere they went. They had 2 children, 9-year-old Andrew and little Naomi, just 13 months old when this story begins. Andrew adored his baby sister. He was the kind of kid who made you believe the world was still mostly good. But loving your family doesn't pay the bills, and Mike's salary as a part-time youth pastor wasn't enough to support 4 people. So when a trusted friend, a man the whole family looked up to, came to Mike with a business proposition, it seemed like an answer to a prayer. Kenneth Allen Keith was a Baptist pastor in Pulaski County, Kentucky. He preached in multiple churches. By all outward appearances, he was a man of God.
I'd gotten on Facebook and noticed, homicides in Danville, Kentucky pawn shop. And immediately my heart sunk because I thought a friend of mine still owned that shop, Allen Keith.
But Pastor Keith had a very particular side business. He didn't just preach the word, he dealt in gold. Keith ran a pawn and gold buying operation in Somerset, about 50 miles from Danville. He understood the business, understood the margins, and understood how much money moved through those glass cases. Under Keith's guidance, Mike Hawkins-Smith joined the trade. He and Angie became co-owners of ABC Gold, Games, and More, a pawn shop right in the heart of Danville, Kentucky.
Pawn shop, that was basically my home. We had all the knickknacks of a pawn shop, from like games to movies to all sorts of junk. It was basically a playground. I absolutely loved it. It was simply amazing.
The family was so close. Mike and Angie decided to homeschool Andrew. Every morning, all 4 of them would show up at the shop together. The pawn shop was their world. It was a good life, until it wasn't. September 20th, 2013 starts like any other Friday. The Hockensmiths arrive at ABC Gold, Games, and More at 9 in the morning. Mike opens up. Angie rocks Naomi. Andrew drifts to his corner of the shop and starts playing a game. A few minutes later, the first customer of the day walks through the door. Daniel P. Smith, 60 years old, from Richmond, Kentucky. He was what people in the trade called a gold broker. He traveled a fixed route every week, visiting pawn shops, buying and selling precious metals, always carrying a briefcase heavy with cash. He'd been to ABC Gold many times. He knew the Hockensmiths. He trusted them. That morning, he trusted them with tens of thousands of dollars in his briefcase. What nobody inside that shop knew was that somewhere between 9 and 9:17 that morning, someone else was watching the building, driving slow, circling, waiting. Andrew is 9 years old. He's playing in the corner. He barely registers when another man walks into the shop.
Shortly after, this guy, he came in as well. And I was like, he's kind of weird looking. He starts to pull out a gun and kind of raises his voice and says, "Get on the ground." And we all did because we was petrified.
8 shots. That's what Andrew heard next. He'd never heard a gun fired with a silencer before. He described the sound as darts. His father tried to reason with the gunman.
Dad was like, "Please stop." He started rolling around until he wasn't. He stopped.
The gunman turned to Dan Smith, and then Angie understood what was coming next. She and her children were going to be next. In the last moment she had, the last thing she ever did, Angie Hawkins-Smith turned to her 2 children and pointed to the back of the shop.
My mom, she told me to go in the back with my sister. I crawl all the way back to the office. I sit my sister on the couch. I'm sitting right beside her.
Hidden in that office, Andrew heard 4 more gunshots, then silence. He waited. He counted seconds. And then, because he had to know, the 9-year-old boy crawled to the doorway.
I remember crawling over to the doorway and seeing that my mom was just laying there with a puddle of blood.
Andrew dragged himself back into the office. His parents were gone. The man with the gun might still be in the building. He was 9 years old, and he had a 13-month-old baby to protect.
He grabbed his little sister up, and he carried her in the office, and he covered her with his body. And,
Okay.
it's just,
Yeah, still doing
he's a hero.
Andrew reached for the office phone. He called 911. It was 9:17 in the morning.
Someone is a robber at a pawn shop,
Someone's robbing the pawn shop?
and my parents got shot.
Where's the robber?
He's right here right now.
The robber. Does he have a gun?
Yes. He shot my parents.
Within 6 minutes of that 911 call, officers are at the scene. The front door is locked. They break through the glass and enter.
As I made entry, all I was thinking about was, is the shooter still here? The first thing that I noticed was a huge smear of blood to my right in the lobby area of the store.
I don't care how many times you've done it or seen it. There's nothing that truly prepares you for this.
3 bodies. Michael and Angie Hawkins-Smith near the front. Dan Smith toward the back. His body had been moved, positioned deliberately, so it couldn't be seen through the front door. Both children are found alive, terrified, physically unharmed. The grandmothers arrive within the hour. Police hold them back at the yellow tape.
And the policeman would not let us up to the shop. They said, "You cannot go in." Well, I just broke down at that point. I knew they were gone. And my heart just sunk. Just couldn't understand why. What had they done so bad that they deserved to die?
The first instinct is obvious. A pawn shop is targeted. 3 people are shot, cash and valuables everywhere. This looks like a robbery gone wrong, except Dan Smith's briefcase is sitting open on the counter, still full of money. The cash register, untouched. Over $1,000 still inside. Both Mike's and Dan's wallets, still in their pockets.
We're like, what do we have here? That it was a hit. Was it on Dan Smith?
Dan Smith was a gold buyer. He carries a briefcase with him with a large amount of cash.
Dan Smith's wife was able to tell us that he would do a certain route on certain days of the week. So he goes to his bank, he gets the money, and then he had a lot of pawn shops that he went to.
If this wasn't a robbery, what was it? Was it a hit on Dan Smith, the gold broker? He carried tens of thousands in cash on a fixed weekly route. Was someone tracking that route? Investigators go to Lawson's Jewelers in Harrodsburg, the last stop Dan made before the Hockensmith shop, just 19 minutes away.
He walks in with that same briefcase and then talks to the lady behind the counter and just appears very relaxed, laughing. Has no idea, obviously, where he's headed. I don't even think it was a full hour after this. Dan Smith was killed.
No leads, no suspects, a triple murder in a quiet Kentucky town, and the police have nothing until the phone rings. A caller tells investigators that their friend, a pastor named Kenneth Allen Keith, has been making suspicious comments about the murders. Strange comments. Comments that should raise questions.
Once Kenneth Allen's name was mentioned, we started looking, okay, who is this guy?
He was involved in the pawn shop business. He had one in Somerset, Kentucky. And he was a pastor of a small town church in Pulaski County, Kentucky. He appeared to be loved by his local congregation.
Pastor Keith, the same Allen Keith who had introduced the Hockensmiths to the pawn business, the same man Andrew called Uncle. He ran a gold-buying shop of his own in Somerset. He preached in multiple churches. He was a beloved man of God. And he just happened to be in Danville on the morning of the murders, 43 miles from his home, on the day 3 people were killed.
I said, "You were in Danville?" He goes, "Yeah." He says, "I was in Danville to pick up my wife's prescriptions."
Alan's given us detailed step-by-step description of where he was that day.
Keith gave a detailed account of his whereabouts, step by step. He had an alibi. And then, investigators dug into his finances. Kenneth Allen Keith had once been the owner of the pawn shop operation, the very business he helped the Hockensmiths build. But somewhere along the way, through debt and poor financial decisions, he lost it. The Hockensmiths took ownership. He never forgave them.
Kenneth felt cheated. He felt that that pawn shop should have been his. And that Hockensmiths basically stole it right out underneath his feet.
There it was, the motive, greed, resentment, the burning belief that someone had taken what was rightfully his. But there was still the alibi. If Keith was at the pharmacy at 9:24 a.m., just 8 minutes after Andrew's 911 call, how could he have committed 3 murders and driven across town that fast? The investigation was about to hinge on one thing, a 9-year-old boy's memory. Investigators sat down with Andrew, a traumatized 9-year-old who had just watched both his parents be murdered. They asked him to describe the man who came into the shop. Andrew described someone heavy-set, possibly in his 40s or 50s. He remembered something on his face, possibly a disguise. He described the sounds, the strange, muffled shots he'd called darts. His 911 call had captured the timestamp, 9:17 a.m.
Okay, can he see you?
I'm in the back right now.
You're in the back? So the robber's up front of the store?
Yes, but I don't know if he's here or not. But come quickly.
Where are your parents?
They're dead on the ground. Come here quickly because I'm afraid. Please hurry.
Okay, they're coming, okay?
Detectives now laid it out. The distance from the pawn shop to the pharmacy Keith used as his alibi was approximately 2.5 miles. In Danville's light morning traffic, with urgency, that was doable in under 10 minutes.
From the pawn shop to the pharmacy, that was a doable time.
The alibi wasn't an alibi at all. It was the plan. Show up on camera 8 minutes after the murders at a pharmacy where you're not even a regular customer, a receipt, a timestamp, a story. But Keith hadn't counted on one thing. He hadn't counted on Andrew being alive.
All right, what happened today?
I ran very fast with my baby sister. I just didn't want to be killed.
Okay.
When investigators went back through security camera footage around ABC Gold, Games, and more, they found it. A silver minivan, driving slow, circling the block, before the murders, and again, driving away after. Kenneth Allen Keith owned a silver minivan.
One of the bodies had been moved to a location where if someone peered into the front door, they wouldn't be able to see that body.
This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was planned, deliberate, methodical. Someone who knew that pawn shop, who knew the layout, who knew which door you could see from the street, and which body to move. 19 days after the murders, investigators execute 3 simultaneous search warrants. Keith's home, his church, his pawn shop in Somerset. An undercover officer enters Keith's shop, posing as a customer. Moments later, Keith is arrested inside his own store.
We discovered a box for a threaded device that can be purchased over the internet that can be fashioned into a makeshift silencer.
The makeshift silencer. That's why Andrew had described the shots as darts.
And then also outside of the business, we found spent 22 shell casings and then a target that had been shot. So we believe that he was practicing prior to the shooting.
And then the casings.
2 casings found in Kenneth Keith's pawn shop matched all the expended shell casings from the murder scene in Danville, Kentucky. They were shot from the identical weapon.
He was practicing in his own backyard, getting ready to walk into that pawn shop, getting ready to kill the family he had once called friends. While investigators built their case, something else emerged, something that made people's skin crawl. On the day the murders became public, Allen Keith had taken to social media to post a tribute to the victims. No sleep at all. I'm in shock right now over the loss of 3 great people. I also knew the third man. He was a business client and a good friend. Family members would later allege that Keith had attended the victims' funerals, that he had offered condolences to the very people whose lives he had destroyed.
But to be able to commit murders on Friday and then get up on the pulpit Sunday morning and preach, especially in front of 2 children, you're going, wait a minute. That's not a real pastor.
Kenneth Allen Keith was indicted by a Boyle County grand jury on 3 counts of murder, first-degree robbery, and first-degree burglary. Years of pretrial hearings followed, motions to suppress, defense delays. A defense attorney who was tragically killed in 2014, forcing the process to restart. A trial was finally set for August 2017. Keith never made it to that trial. On May 26, 2017, Kenneth Allen Keith stood before a judge and pleaded guilty.
It's a bizarre triple murder that has stunned the Danville community. Almost 1 month after a Baptist pastor allegedly gunned down 3 people inside a pawn shop. Kenneth Keith pleads not guilty to his charges.
3 counts of murder, first-degree robbery, first-degree burglary. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will never see freedom again. May 26, 2017, was also Andrew Hawkins-Smith's 13th birthday. On the day Andrew turned 13, the man who murdered his parents was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. His greed and jealousy will never hurt anyone again. After the murders, Andrew didn't just survive. He found a way to carry what he'd been through. He started drawing comic books, pages filled with the story of what happened, his way of processing a grief that no child should ever have to feel. He raised Naomi alongside their grandparents. He watched his little sister grow up, looking more and more like their mother with every passing year.
I've been told you're a spitting image of your dad. You look just like him. You act just like him. Naomi, she looks just like my mom. I'm very thankful for what I have. And in a sense, it's like I am living through my parents' life. My parents will always live on within me.
Michael and Angela Hawkins-Smith came to that pawn shop every morning with their children. They wanted their family close. In the end, despite everything, that closeness saved 2 lives because they raised a boy who, at 9 years old, in the worst moment imaginable, thought of his sister before himself, covered her with his body, picked up the phone, and told the truth about what he saw. Kenneth Allen Keith, DOC inmate number 468626, is currently serving life without parole at a Kentucky State Correctional Facility. He will never be released. Andrew Hawkins-Smith is an adult today. He is engaged and surrounded by family. Naomi Hawkins-Smith grew up in the care of her grandparents. Daniel P. Smith's family received restitution from the case proceeds.